The UK's Climate Change Act is now 10 years old. In 2008,
Order!
a huge majority of MPs voted to write climate change targets into UK law.
The ayes to the right, 463. The noes to the left, 3. The ayes have it. Unlocked. Order.
This bill will constrain every future UK government to ensure that its carbon emissions do not exceed the level of budgets that are agreed between a carbon committee made up of independent people and government itself.
It was celebrated as the world's first legislation of its kind, a legally binding target to limit CO2 emissions by 80% by 2050. This, claimed its designers, would give Britain an edge in the growing market for green technology. It would create jobs and save households and businesses from rising energy prices.
The UK stands to benefit hugely from a supply of low-carbon energy that is affordable, secure, and sustainable. It will help to prevent dangerous climate change and protect us from price volatility.
But 10 years on, has the Climate Change Act matched its advocates' promises?
Well, the huge industrial revolution that is unfolding in converting our economy to low carbon is going to present huge business and employment opportunities.
And it's already a $3 trillion worldwide industry set to grow by 50%.
Let us each set a challenge to business. Let us compete to lead the world in the new low-carbon products.
The biggest problem for the Climate Change Act has been the extraordinary costs that it has caused. These costs are created by the Act's aggressive emissions reduction target. In order to replace fossil fuel generating capacity, the UK government created subsidies to encourage the development of electricity generation from renewable sources of energy. But by one conservative estimate, meeting the targets in this way will cost households £319 billion between 2014 and 2030. The cost of meeting the Act will rise from £327 per household per year in 2014 to £875 per household in 2030, a cumulative extra £10,800 burden on each household over the period.
We are potentially asking our constituents to bear a burden of £10,000 for every household, should we increase it. We are potentially producing benefits that may be only half the costs that we are securing.
From the perspective of the consumer, this expense has come with no benefit. It has not made supply more reliable and not made energy more accessible or affordable. The risk of winter blackouts has returned to the UK as capacity margins have fallen, and variability introduced to the system by unpredictable changes in the weather now threatens grid stability. To mitigate the supply problems created by dependence on renewable sources, energy-intensive industries are paid to shut down, adding a further burden on the consumer. And a smart grid has been conceived which will ultimately allow suppliers to switch off domestic appliances to help balance the system.
Put your energy supplier to install a smart meter and you'll be able to see exactly how much energy you're using in pounds and pence.
In other words, rationing.
Many great companies are ahead of governments in making their decisions to combat climate change, that the insurance companies were amongst the first to recognise its reality, and that there are few people in business now who have studied this who do not see it as something of a business opportunity rather than a burden.
The only groups to have benefited from the Act are renewable energy generators, landowners and subsidy-hungry investors looking for profits guaranteed by government. But one group has suffered more than any other. 3 years before the Climate Change Act, the then governing Labour Party's 2005 election manifesto promised to eliminate fuel poverty by 2015. Back then, fuel poverty was defined as a household spending more than 10% of its income on keeping their home warm. But by 2013, energy poverty rates had not fallen. To avoid the political embarrassment of reversing the policies that all parties had championed, the then Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, announced a new measure of fuel poverty. Under the new measure, households are only considered fuel poor if it is impossible to reduce their fuel poverty by increasing the energy efficiency of their homes. But even defining away the problem of fuel poverty did not work for the government. The number of households experiencing it grew in the decade to 2015.
We have the same ambition as you, that offshore wind turbines can come on stream and on grid as soon as possible. We will continue to provide clear signals to the market so that you can be sure of government's long-term commitment to the renewables industry.
The ambition of eliminating fuel poverty has been abandoned in favour of sustaining the Climate Change Act and its targets.
We've got a big opportunity here. I want us to be the greenest government ever. A very simple ambition and one that I'm absolutely committed to achieving.
Rather than solving climate change, the only detectable effect of the Climate Change Act has been to sustain levels of energy poverty that politicians from all parties had promised to abolish. Environmental policy costs are passed to households in cost of living increases and downward pressure on wages and rates of employment. The Climate Change Act is increasing the overall cost of living since businesses pass rising energy costs to consumers. In short, the Climate Change Act has increased general poverty in the UK, not just energy poverty.
That's why next week, this government will publish a draft bill to put a price cap on energy bills, meeting our manifesto promise and bring an end to rip-off energy prices once and for all.
The problems caused by the Act have forced politicians to abandon the most vulnerable in society and to patch policy failure with ever more complex and unworkable interventions.
Historically, this House has made its worst mistakes not when it's divided, but when it's virtually unanimous. Not when it's adversarial, but when MPs switch off their critical faculties in a spasm of moral self-congratulation.
To find out more about the UK's Climate Change Act and its many problems, download the 10th anniversary of the Climate Change Act report from the GWPF website.